Star Trek, the ultimate franchise. These are the voyages of 3 veteran Trekkies, Rich, Ian, and Toby. Their ongoing mission? To explore the vast Star Trek universe, to seek out new perspectives and fresh debates, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. Beyond the Final Frontier.
Hello and welcome to Beyond the Final Frontier, a Star Trek podcast with me, your host Rich Matthews, and my fellow intrepid voyagers, Mr. Ian Spelling.
Hello, everybody.
And Mr. Toby Weidman.
Hello.
How are we, chaps? Are we good?
We are good.
Melting.
Well, that's going to date the podcast.
This heat wave's going to carry on forever. So.
It appears so, yes. Yeah. Climate change deniers beware in the UK at the moment. This episode, we are marking the 10th anniversary release of Star Trek Beyond, which was the 22nd of July 2016.
I just want to double check, are we marking or mocking?
We're both, probably. We'll do our best, though. We can normally find the good.
How I've decided to do this is I've picked 5 things that I like about the JJ films, because we're discussing them in general as part of the celebrating the release of Star Trek Beyond 10 years ago, because there are things that I do like about those films. And I've done 5 things that I don't like as basically talking points.
Excellent. I think that's the thing with them. They're not... I often feel like I'm probably more judgmental because there's good things in them. Mm-hmm. And I think you can see what they potentially could have been. So just for a bit of scene setting, let's say, just to recap, the 2009 J.J. Abrams' Kelvin Universe reboot of Star Trek was released on May 8th, 2009. Its immediate sequel, Star Trek Into Darkness, followed 4 years later on May 17th, 2013. And then with it's not a bigger gap, actually. It's a bit shorter, isn't it? But then following with Star Trek Beyond on July 22nd, 2016. The last Kelvin Universe film, it looks likely. Certainly, we're now, as we said, we're 10 years away from the last one, and the cast are aging. And although we are accustomed to an aging Star Trek movie cast, I don't think they'll get everyone back in this. We know that Paramount are essentially in the process of rebooting the films.
That slightly shorter window between Into Darkness and Beyond was because they were rushing to get the film out for the 50th anniversary of Star Trek.
Right.
Indeed.
Which was in September of that year. I don't know quite why they decided to release it in July. I guessed it was to fall into the summer blockbuster period.
Yeah, because they couldn't make that May. They're going for the May release window, which is the blockbuster slot. Clearly,
the May was horrific that year. I had a look to see what else was out. You had Captain America: Civil War and Batman vs Superman. Those are the 2 really big ones.
Also, as you say, they were rushing. So they couldn't have hit that date even if they'd wanted to. And as we know from now in retrospect, Beyond was the lowest performer of all 3 of them. So it would have absolutely died against those other films. It was not in a place of the franchise to go toe to toe. And in fact, reverting to what it was normally like previously. But it is worth commenting on the fact that the gap between the 2009 and Into Darkness was, I think, one of the biggest, wasn't it? Because other than the fallow period, because you had a motion picture in 79, Wrath of Khan in 82, when they did a retool to some degree. Then it was 2 years, all the way through to every 2 years, all the way into Undiscovered Country. So, which is an interesting thing, that we used to be able to produce movies of certain scale, certain size on that time frame. But it's become harder and harder and harder to do so. And yet they want to make even more.
Well, that's a Hollywood thing. That's a Star Trek thing. That's a Paramount thing. That's all for a bunch of reasons. These things did and did not happen. The bigger shock to me is that anybody has let a decade go by without a new Star Trek film. Look, I get that they're expensive, but there is an international audience for them. But then you ran into that whole thing of, we've got to have an action film like Guardians of the Galaxy. It's got to be, Star Trek and funny and action. You can't shoehorn all of that into something that is already something else. It's a real issue. And it's only going to get more complicated just because of all of the political intrigue going on, conservative, liberal, all of that with the new regime at Paramount. I'm pretty much certain that the Kelvin timeline is done. I am fascinated to see what happens if there are more films in the offing, if there are more series in the offing. How does that change what Star Trek is fundamentally? Are we boldly going? Are we going to explore stories? Will there be LGBTQ plus type of stories going forward, or will there be a feeling that you can't touch that now? And will that be an internal mandate?
And this 10-year gap is the biggest gap. Even before the reboot, it was 7 years, I think it was 2002, wasn't it, Nemesis? This is the biggest theatrical gap since the motion picture in 1979, since that 10-year period off air entirely for Star Trek. And I can't remember off the top of my head, when did Enterprise wrap? Was it 2005?
Yeah,
even that's only 4 years. When and at the time, the tenor of the fan discussions and and everything was that Star Trek was in crisis, franchise fatigue, and all that. And then it was only really gone for 4 years, and then it came back. Now we've had quite a lot of TV, obviously recently, and we've talked about that extensively. But it is now with Starfleet Academy wrapping its 2nd season, and Strange New Worlds wrapping its 5 seasons, admittedly with 2 to air. What's the gap going to be? Because you're quite right, Ian, and not only on the sort of global political scale, but just the reality of the Paramount-Warner Brothers merger, if that happens, and what impact that's going to have.
Right.
And we know that to make a big show of theatrical, Paramount have said they will go with a theatrical Star Trek first, which is an interesting choice. I think it might be a good one, because it might have some downtime for the franchise, which I don't think necessarily is a bad thing in terms of a full creative reboot. But I guess my question to both of you is, how do you feel about reboots in general, and then Star Trek in particular at the moment?
Look, I much prefer original content, but I understand with Star Trek specifically, and this is actually true of any IP out there, you do want to build on something that people are familiar with. So I get the safety net of doing that. I understand the business approach to doing that. It's not particularly exciting creatively or as a viewer sometimes, unless it's done really right, which we will get to, because Star Trek 2009 was actually a good example of making that work, whereas the other two were not quite as successful at doing it. I'm not against reboots. I'm just against bad reboots. And I would much prefer to have some original content out there. But you're asking studios to spend $100-200 million to do something. And I get that they want to have something built in. Look, the whole concept of the reboots was to attract the younger audience, but also bring in the older audience, right? That's a really hard thing to pull off. And we've seen it across tons of franchises and shows and movies and even music. They're all just trying to, show that they can do something else, but build on what came before. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Tobes?
I think I would go along with that. I would point to something like Batman and the number of times that has been rebooted. So you have like the 1990s Batman, the Tim Burton very comic book-like one, then it went grittier with the Christopher Nolan ones, and then you had the more recent one with the Batman. And they have all been interesting takes on that character. So I think it really depends on, you have to create the story. And if the story fits and the characters fit within, then I have no problem with them rebooting. The problem falls into something like Into Darkness, where it just lent on something that was already existing and already within the canon, and it tried to do its own twist on it. That is something that I don't think works, because the audience is already bringing its own expectations in. Like, you could do Khan, you can make it very, very different. They've done multiple villains in
Star Trek's the Joker. That's essentially what he is.
Exactly. But you have to do something that, it's not repetitive. So, I'm not against reboots either. I would prefer something original, but I think that's kind of hard to do with something like Star Trek that has such an existing canon, because there will always be fans that will say, oh, why didn't they do Kirk or the Enterprise D or something like, why didn't they just recast that?
Well, for me, I think it comes back to the fallow period thing. because we've got a current example. So obviously, like a lot of us, I'm part of multiple fandoms, all the obvious ones really. And the only one which has not got anything out, and I'm not a gamer, so it doesn't. The recent game doesn't fall in, is James Bond. And I'm finding myself disproportionately excited, even though it's years away, still, for a new James Bond film, because I haven't had a James Bond film in ages. And I think that's what we're missing.
That's another good example, Bond, actually, yeah.
I agree with you about reboots, and I'm not sure comparisons to comic book characters is a fair one in general for franchises. I also think that's one of the issues that's plagued franchise cinema is following Marvel's lead, because comic books have always done it. You're talking, it's an adaptation of a medium which has consistently had what-ifs, Elseworlds, variations, reboots since the 30s, 40s, 50s in some form. The thing with James Bond, I'm not a fan of the rebooting James Bond, mainly because for a long time it was a singular franchise exercise. You had to come in, bring in a new actor, and make it work in a continuous timeline. That was something unusual, unique, and until they rebooted for Casino Royale. But at the time, to back up to some degree what you've both said, Casino Royale was such a great movie, one of the best James Bond films, that you kind of think, oh well. So that's what it is. If you must reboot, I just think it actually raises the need for it to be outstanding.
Well, here's a different comparison. What about the JJ Star Wars and what that did in terms of bringing back legacy characters and having new ones? Now, you can look at the first one. It was a bit derivative of what had gone before. The second one, they tried to do something completely new and it just split audiences completely. And then with the finale, they then went back into doing something that is very familiar, and that was unsatisfactory as well.
That's an understatement for the last one.
Yeah. I know people who like that one. I don't understand it, but I do know people who like it.
And I wouldn't normally say this, and they're wrong. They're wrong.
I mean, one of the criticisms that I've read about JJ is that he knows how to start a story, but doesn't know how to finish it.
I think that's true. He's good at establishing the outside of his mystery box, but normally they're empty. Once you open them, there's nothing really substantial in there, and it's often a promise of something that isn't there. Yeah, it's like you've been promised the best slice of chocolate cake you've ever going to have, and everything outside says, what's it going to be like there? And then in reality, it's kind of, But I would say about Force Awakens the same thing, to bring it back to Star Trek, that about my primary issue with both Force Awakens and Star Trek 2009 is the same thing, which is the execution is full of verve, energy, the casting's good, it's visually stunning. Both of them are the same, but inherently the scripts are half-baked and predicated on coincidence. And so ultimately, they're a confection. And I think, as we've talked about many times about Star Trek, that's more problematic for Star Trek. It was a problem for Star Wars too, ultimately, but for Star Trek it's more of a problem because it's a meaty franchise. It's a franchise of great characters exploring fantastical ideas with great depth and interest and rigor and techno-babble that's based in science and all those sort of things. So once you start palming it off with a somewhat superficial confection of a screenplay, it can't ultimately be as good as what we would hope. I
describe it as a generic space action movie with the veneer of Star Trek.
Correct.
I'd agree with that.
I do want to point out one thing of defense of J.J. Abrams. The ball was dropped on Lost, which unfortunately was his biggest success, and in many ways, in the view of a lot of people, his biggest failure with the finale. But Alias stuck the landing. Fringe stuck the landing. And I will say that I happen to have absolutely loved Person of Interest for its entire run, and the ending was great. And that was fully developed characters right down to the last minute. Amy Acker just killed me, but it didn't work with his films, with the Star Wars or Star Trek films. I totally agree with that. But I do want to say he did have a track record of sticking landings. And that's what made me hopeful that these other franchises would stick the landing.
I think that's TV versus film. I think that's the issue. And you need to, it's always worth remembering what he wrote prior to Alias and things. So, he was regarding Henry, Armageddon and things like that. Not unenjoyable films, but hardly what you would say substantive and top draw. And that's fine when it's entertainment.
Hey, Felicity, baby.
Yeah, I never watched that.
Well, you're a loss. fucking Brits.
Kerry Russell. Yeah, so for me, that's what I find frustrating about all three of them. But in particular, the first one, 2009, is that the execution's fabulous. And I just find myself wondering what it could have been like. I always find that more difficult from a critical point of view when you can see the kernel of something genuinely great. And so it's like, I just wish JJ had worked with different writers he'd not worked with before, rather than his coterie of acolytes who have been essentially brought through his model, trained in the way he does it, which is not the most rigorous screenwriting. Fun, entertaining, by all means, even with good endings, but always foregrounding cool things at the expense of logic and sense and character. I think that's probably fair to say.
I do not disagree on that one, but this is one of the catch-22s. If you bring in fresh voices to reconstitute IP, you're going to get people who say it's too far from the original. On the other hand, if you bring in people who have experience with a franchise, people are going to then say, well, this adheres too much to what came before and what's original about it. So it is a real catch-22. I mean, that is the crux of our conversation about reboots. You could not have gotten a better cast for 2009 and to launch a franchise. I thought Chris Pine nailed it. I thought Quinto nailed it. I thought Karl Urban was the best thing in the movie. I thought Simon Pegg was terrific. I wish that Cho and Saldana and Anton Yelchin had more to do, but I thought they were all very good and perfectly cast. Let's start with the opening of the film. The sacrifice that George Kirk makes is really emotional and sets the story in motion in a really believable, kind of cool way.
I think that's the best part of the film.
The concept of the Kelvin timeline is interesting. I give them credit for coming up with a way of giving us our characters, but not having them be exactly our characters. That let them look a little different, that let them voices be different. Things can go in different directions if you're doing a different timeline. I will also say that I thought the movie was exciting as hell. It moved. There was some Star Trek logic in there. There was also some Star Trek, what's the word I'm looking for here? Thematic work in there as well. That, we are boldly going, but we are trying to make a difference. It wasn't super thought-provoking, but at least it had a plot. Why don't we talk about what works for the movie, and then maybe we'll go into what doesn't work?
Oh, just before we do that, very quickly, can we remind people, they can go back and listen to our movie rankings, but what was our individual order? We don't have to go into it in depth, but how do we position them, the three of them, in terms of our opinion of them?
Well, Beyond was my favourite, then 2009, and then Into Darkness.
Same for me.
Right, I think we all more or less agreed on that, yeah.
I think, actually, Ian, I think you ranked Star Trek, the 2009, above Beyond.
Just by a hair. I almost voted them equal. If I'm going to sit down and watch one of them, I actually prefer the first one. Again, and as we've discussed, my issue with all three of the movies is that we just have a pissed off Starfleet person causing trouble. All three have the same exact basic plot.
And all three wasted great actors.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, poor Benedict Cumberbatch. You got the hottest guy on the planet in 2009, and they didn't give him a goddamn thing to do.
Also, we looked like he had chapped lips all the time, and I couldn't work out quite what was going on with that. Anyway, we'll come to Into Darkness.
Shall I go through the 5 things that I liked about it, and then the 5 things that I disliked, and then...
Why don't you do the 5 you liked, and then, Rich, you do that too, and then maybe we'll get into what we don't like.
You have mentioned a lot of these before. My first point is, with 2009, I think that is probably the best opener of any Star Trek film. You could say that Kobayashi Maru is joint.
Close.
Yeah. It's exciting, it's kinetic, and it captures the sense of self-sacrifice and heroism that we are familiar with the franchise, the needs of the many. He makes that decision to sacrifice himself. Compare that with the teaser to Into Darkness and how terrible that is. My next point, the second point, is the production values are amazing.
Through the roof.
The music is great. Mm-hmm. I like the new costumes, particularly the Beyond ones. I think they're very good. It's brilliantly edited. It gets that excitement up. It won Oscars for its maker. The effects are great, and I would argue they are done in a way that is pacey without being headache-inducing, which is the problem that I find with Discovery particularly. The third point is casting. I put universally great. I put even Zachary Quinto, because I think he had the hardest act to follow, I'll be perfectly honest.
And the most hype beforehand. Everyone thought he was a perfect casting and that Pine was dodgy, and I think in reality, for me, they switched in.
I think it's made even harder by the fact that Leonard Nimoy is also in the films as Spock.
Yeah.
He's not our Spock, but he is a Spock, and I do think he fulfills that role. I don't like that version as much, but I accept that that is a different take on the character and his portrayal. And if anything, I think he's let down by poor writing. This goes for everyone. There's a lack of any depth or subtlety. My fourth point is that JJ knows how to build and maintain momentum. I think that's true of all three films, although I know he didn't direct Beyond. But they all rattle along at a fantastic pace, and even the quieter moments, they are snappy. The dialogue is snappy, and there's lots of witty repartee, so the comedy is pretty good. You hardly get a chance to catch your breath before there's another big action scene, which is great, but also comes with a caveat, which is in my negatives. And then, Ian, you mentioned this as well, the creation of the Kelvin timeline. I thought it was a very, very smart idea because it gave them the freedom to create something completely new. Feature existing characters who are the same yet not the same. So we know them, we love them, but you can do something new with them. And I don't mind that the Klingons and the Romulans look different. That's fine because it's a new timeline.
Right.
I can accept all of that. If you're going to reboot it, that's a good way to do it.
Ian? Well, I gave you most of mine already. Let me break a couple of specifics. I thought Michael Giacchino's score was excellent. He did a nice job of giving us vestiges of Alexander Courage and Jerry Goldsmith while creating his own score. And I thought he did a really nice job of latching the music onto the quieter moments and onto the action. And I thought those dovetailed really, really well. I want to give a little shout out, not too major, to Winona Ryder's Amanda. I love that character in the old show, and I was thrilled when they cast her. She had one lovely scene, basically, and if you've ever seen the outtakes, she was cut. There was not significantly more of her, but more of her that added a little more depth to the Amanda-Spock relationship, that added a little more to Ryder's performance overall. It's important stuff before Vulcan's destruction in terms of what could have lent a little more emotional weight to the film. So it's a positive and a negative.
And particularly to Spock's reaction to
the destruction of Vulcan, exactly.
And death of his mother, yeah.
Yeah.
Because his reaction is understandable, but it's so violent when he attacks Kirk, when Kirk provokes him. That's not something that our Spock would do.
No, but that's a declaration of intent. It's clearly a manifesto moment for what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And by the way, let's add in that people were waiting and waiting and waiting on more Star Trek, right? At this point, it was 4 years since Enterprise ended. Also, let's not forget that while Enterprise is undeservedly overlooked overall, that finale absolutely turned a lot of people off. A lot of people flat out hated it and took it out on the series as a whole. And even though the intent was good, the finished product was not. So I think, when spring of 2009 came around, there was a lot of excitement for this film, and it delivered. And by the way, it did something that not a lot of Star Trek did, which was delivered overseas.
The interesting point on that,
yeah,
I like box office stuff, so I looked this up. The international take for Star Trek 2009 was 33.2%. The international take for Star Trek Into Darkness was 51%.
Yeah, it was a lot higher. But it went back down, didn't it, for Beyond?
Yeah. No, it didn't.
Oh, it didn't?
International for Beyond was 53.8%.
But then domestic went down. Is that what happened?
Yes.
The actual numbers went down, but the percentage take. So the percentage international for Beyond matched Into Darkness. So it actually grew. So you could say that 2009 set the stage.
Well, it set the stage for something bigger, and then
which then Into Darkness built on. Yeah.
And the streaming era, though, we may well see a continuation or even an increase of that balance, because the one thing streaming has done, well, whatever you think of the quality of the shows, is the access in international territories is significantly higher. Because previously we were all behind. Everyone was trying to catch up to the US,
right?
And it put you on a back foot, and you felt like second-class citizens as Star Trek fans outside of the US for a long time. And that, I think, translated to some degree. So it would be very interesting to see if that continued. I think that my positives are pretty much in line with your guys. I would re-echo the Giacchino, because one of the things is I like to, when I can, to go and see movies with live orchestras, because it can be transformative for the scores. And Giacchino's score in person with a full orchestra was really awesome. That's not to say, of course, that Jerry Goldsmith or James Horner's wouldn't be either, and I've never seen those alongside the movies like I did with that one. I have been very lucky to see Jerry Goldsmith conduct in the flesh, and there's no denying how good the Motion Picture March is in person as well. But it was really strong, the bombastic nature of it, the drums, the energy. I think a lot of what you talked about, the energy of it, Toby, when you talked about the speed, yes, it's the edit, but it's that music. He is the heartbeat.
Oh, it's the pairing.
Yeah, and I don't think you've ever had as propulsive a score underneath. I think the closest you get is probably the last act of Wrath of Khan, but it's much more subtle. There's very specific a motif of Giacchino's Star Trek score is summed up by the opening, where you see the Kelvin explode and the shuttle drives away, and then you have the logo reveal, and it is all bum 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 bum, and you've not had that like that before. There have been drums, there have been rhythms, there have been, yes, but not like that. And that's what recurring, and it's all bang bang bang. And yeah, it could be overbearing, but Giacchino's too good, and it works really well. So I think that's a saving grace for all three of them. And makes it even worse that they feel the need to bring in contemporary music, because you didn't need to. The score was already strong enough, that sort of thing.
By contemporary music, do you mean the Beastie Boys? Sabotage?
Well, I mean, sorry, non-diegetic historical ancient Earth music.
See, I'm just gonna say I love the fact that the Beastie Boys feature in it, because the Beastie Boys are big Star Trek fans. A lot of their lyrics, a lot of their bars feature references to Star Trek. So I was happy that they had that initial intro. Whether they should have repeated it in Beyond, I know it gives it a circular aspect. I probably wouldn't have gone for that.
I'm lukewarm, and I think it opened the way for that god-awful use of San Francisco in Starfleet Academy. I agree about the cast, but I will single out Pine. I didn't think you could get anyone to play Kirk other than Shatner, because they're all distinctive, but Shatner is singular in many ways. And I was so worried we were going to get like Kevin Pollak doing an impression of Shatner and things like that. And he was really good, and he was very subtle in his referencing. And also it was a lovely performance arc. And at the end, he is a bit more Shatner-like, but not as, as Shatner was. But it had the right tone, and I really like him in the role.
But even then, I don't think his Kirk is the same as Shatner's Kirk.
No, it's not. No, but that's what I mean.
Which is the point. Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, there's layers to it, and it's interesting. And he does a lot. I think he does a lot with a lot less time, actually, interestingly, than Shatner did. And he's always good, even in Into Darkness. And he's given some doggerel material later on in Into Darkness to work with, and he's still good, if you see what I mean. And whereas I don't quite feel the same about Quinto. I feel like Quinto, in the weak moments, Quinto's performance is slightly exposed by the poor writing, whereas I feel like Pine brings some stuff back.
Elevates it.
Yeah, can't save all of it, but some of it. I agree about the visual effects as a whole, although it was the beginning of Too Dark.
Not on the bridge.
No. We'll get to that in the negatives.
Yeah.
I agree about the uniforms specifically and Beyond. I thought the other ones were slightly meh. But also, interestingly for me, when they stepped outside of the original series template more and did new types of uniforms, I thought they were better. And that sort of goes into that thing. Like, I love the jackets and things that they wore in Beyond when they were on the planet. And that just made me go, we should have done that. Should have done new uniforms. How many is that? 3? I think so.
You don't have to do 5. It's just like...
We're
not beholding you to 5.
No.
I want 4.5, Rich.
Yeah, 4.5's fine. I think that's probably my lot. I agree about the beginning. I would say that is a strength overall. I love the beginning.
So something on that point. So I really don't like the Into Darkness start.
Yeah.
The tease on that. The tease on Beyond is also played as a comic relief.
But it's better.
Yeah, and it kind of fits in with the First Contact aspect.
And it's plot too. It actually turns out to serve the plot.
Yeah, and part of Kirk's frustration with his 5-year mission.
It's a decent joke. I mean, if you've watched Buffy, it's not a new joke. Even Buffy, I suspect, has been done before. But the fake out that the bad guy is in fact tiny. But it was nicely executed. I agree, but that does show you. We can all agree, I would say, right, that we'd say the perfect balance of a more comedic Star Trek film with proper gravitas is Voyager. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
And we all agreed on that, right? It doesn't start funny. There's humor in the beginning, but it's very serious. And I think that's the only thing which is slightly lacking once you get to Into Darkness veers back and forth. Beyond didn't quite get as the gravitas as much, but that beginning of 2009 is just brilliant, and it's serious without being dull and entertaining, and it gets you hyped up. And propels you through a large chunk of what comes, I think, in terms of forgiving a lot of the plot problems. But so there you go. Those are things I like.
Right. What doesn't work?
Shall I go?
Yep. Feel free, Toast.
All right. So this is my list of 5 things that I don't like. The first one, I mentioned it before, that it is just a generic space action movie with the veneer of Star Trek. And it's clearly it was made to widen the audience as much as possible. And I think that is at the expense of existing fans. Lots of crowd-pleasing stuff to a general audience, but as Rich would like to say, there are no big ideas driving that plot.
None. Apart from the Kelvin, apart from that. That is that's set up. But yeah, that is not bad. That's a good solution, as we were all agreed on that.
But in terms of the morality or philosophy or spirituality,
there is none.
And there could have been, because there's a lot of environmental stuff and genocide stuff in there that's sort of glossed over.
Yeah, I mean, you can say Into Darkness does have like the 9/11 allegory. It's a little bit heavy-handed, but it does have that. You can say that there is a central message, at least in the first one, of trying to achieve the best version of yourself, which is a good Star Trek message, but it's just also it's not very deep
or grand.
Yeah, it's not engaging in that sense. My second point is JJ's style of direction is often good, but it is also a literal lens flare in terms of it's designed to distract audiences. Look at this flashy thing. Ignore the plot hole. Don't worry about the story. Look at this. Woo, woo.
Look into my eyes. Not anywhere else. Just in my eyes. Not around the eyes. Just look in the eyes. Look in the eyes. Look in the eyes.
And obviously the actual lens flare is something that is just overused. The plot holes in the story.
Holes? They're bloody Bajoran wormhole size.
I understand that there is additional material, such as the comic books, that fill in some of that stuff, but I shouldn't have to read additional stuff in order to understand.
Even that's going to be scaffolding.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to drop Kirk by accident on the same planet that old Spock stranded on, where Scotty happens to be working. They're all walking distance. What?
Number 3, I don't like the Enterprise, both the exterior and the interior.
I'll get to that.
Everything is too big. And I think this is an obsession with modern blockbusters, that everything has to be massive and
modern
grand
Star Trek for sure.
And overwhelming. The big bad, the galaxy-ending revenge story. Give me something small, intimate, character-focused, with some gripping action thrown in as a secondary.
All these submarines would sink, they're so big.
Yeah. 4th, the characters really aren't developed enough. We just never get enough depth to them. Kirk, maybe. Spock, perhaps.
But that's fine. Again, I'll say that's a lot as that is fine.
Yeah. Even with those two, Kirk is too glib to really care what happens to him, and Spock is too unlikable. You don't really ever feel any emotional connection to either of them. So even when, for instance, with Spock, when he loses his planet and his mother, you don't really emote with him. Beyond is the most successful in terms of the characters, like developing the characters.
The Spock and McCoy stuff in that is good. I think, yeah.
But that's because there has been a focus put on that, and also it benefits by the fact that it's the third in the series, so you've had more time with these characters. And finally, we knew JJ wasn't a Star Trek fan, he was a Star Wars fan. Now, that doesn't mean it is a detriment to the film. I mean, you look at Nick Meyer, he basically managed to become steeped in the original series, understand the lore, and make a connection. You know, the whole Horatio Hornblower, he chose to go that route, and that's what he saw in the original series, and he brought it into the film.
Yeah, but Meyer's a class act.
I get the feeling JJ didn't do that. I think he knew Star Trek, Kirk and Spock, and so he put the focus on them. We know that he wanted to always make a Star Wars film. I do feel that he brought a Star Wars kind of aesthetic or approach to Star Trek, which maybe doesn't quite fit as well within that franchise. And you mentioned it earlier, all three villains, they're just not good. That's it. Can I just tell you one very interesting fact? I timed this, right? I think Star Trek 2009 is great up to the 29-minute and 11-second mark.
I would always say the first half hour is good, so that's interesting that it's that close, right? That's interesting.
And that is the scene where Nero says, "We've been waiting 25 years for this ship, for us to get our revenge."
Whoop, whoop, whoop. Show don't tell, show don't tell. Whoop, whoop, whoop.
And it was at that point where I started to go, what?
Quietly. You know, great big, huge, humongous Romulan ship.
All right, the things I hated.
Concentrate with the H word. Whoa.
Yeah, no, I absolutely despised the comic bit with Kirk's hands.
Oh, yes.
All right. I can't tell you how put off I was by that.
You have before, and you're going to again.
At the screening I was at, I was like, oh my God. I mean, it was literally slapstick comedy, and it did not land. It never should have been written, it never should have been filmed, and it never should have made the final cut. It added absolutely nothing to the film and took promising characters back 2 steps that they needed to recover from in a very fast-paced movie. And then I'm back and forth on destroying Vulcan. I think it was an important thing to do. It does add a little bit of consequence. It does add a little bit of character introspection for Spock and some of the other characters as well who have to react to what happens. On the other hand, it felt very arbitrary. Why, of all things, Vulcan? So I had a big issue with that. The Enterprise looked like an Apple store. I remember everybody bitching about that when the movie opened. Everything was just gleaming.
You couldn't work in it. You'd go nuts.
It doesn't make sense. Aren't we supposed to be on something resembling a submarine in some way, shape, or form here?
Or maybe even like an aircraft carrier, which is still not roomy.
Right. And again, look, let's get into, we're not going to bother with seatbelt issues and all of that kind of thing, or, walking around barefoot.
Your worst nightmare is someone walking around barefoot with the big floppy hands, isn't it?
Yes. Well, he should have walked on his hands. He should have done cartwheels. Obviously we also have the lens flares just drove me up a wall. At first I thought it was a mistake, then I realized it wasn't, which made me hate it even more.
Light. It's not even real lens flares. He has someone waving a pen light into the camera.
They do calm it down. It does calm down throughout the series.
That's why Beyond is better.
Based on complaints.
Yeah, Beyond is better because one doesn't do it.
Right. The real question is, I still wanted to boldly go and explore. We're missing some of the tenets of Star Trek. But, importantly, we didn't have to have all of that in the first film if it was going to be setting up things to come. Let's get the crew together. Let's get them on the ship. Let's put them out into space. Let's set up some of the current world of our alternate timeline. And then let's let them go on adventures. Nothing really did happen after that. So it makes it even more disappointing.
Agreed. So for me, first things first is Sulu. I think of all the characters, he is just dramatically underserved as a character.
You mean the parachute sequence at the beginning wasn't enough for you?
Any of it, and just and given the trials and tribulations of George, and he was still able to shine out. And it was great that Chekhov and Yelchin got to do so well, and obviously his sad loss was even more pointed. But it was like they didn't know what to do with Sulu. That was a real shame, especially when you look at where Takai left it. In Undiscovered Country, arguably Sulu's finest moment. as the captain of the Excelsior. It's like, oh God, you couldn't see this guy doing that.
But they didn't really know what to do with the Uhura either.
That's my next point.
Sorry.
I don't like the fact that the only way they could flesh out Uhura was making her have a romance with Spock. That's it. It's a faux nod to an increase in the female audience. It's an attempt to court that rather than actually doing the character any justice. Fails the Bechdel test because she spends most of her time, barely any of her being competent at her job. There's some, but then most of it is her fretting about Spock. And that is actually a bit of a betrayal of everything the show did. And that is a real tragedy for me. And also, it's very hard to then not escape the fact that it's the two more diverse characters who got short shrift, which is a shame. As much as I like Pine, as good as Quinto is, as great as Yelchin is, and Peg is, if it has to come at the expense of Sulu and Uhura, I don't like that at all. After that, fuck the lens flares and the drumming on the camera. If you see the behind-the-scenes footage, he actually drums the camera to make it shake. It's all faux. It's all fake. The lens flares and the camera wobble and things, it's all a contrivance. And it's like, you know what? Hand-hold it. Do it properly. If that's how you're going to be authentic, don't make it fake. I know it's all fake, but it's just like, oh my God, it's an artifice. And
you do know you're watching a film, right?
Thanks for that. That's what I was just trying to course correct in the last second. Yeah. Primarily, the other thing is now you've already talked about the bridge, which I don't like because let's face it, everyone would have to wear sunglasses on that bridge. But it's the ship. It's the outside of the Enterprise. And we all know how much I love the refit Enterprise. And it's like they set out to take a beautiful thing and just make it worse.
When it gets destroyed in Beyond, you're kind of like, thank God.
Yeah, I was quite happy. And Star Trek 3, oh God, oh no. And then it's like, yeah, good, right, new ship. So I am not sad to see that ship retired. If I was going to have a biggest fear about the return of Star Trek in movie theatres, it's this ship.
Well, I'll worry if they start doing floaty nacelles. That'll definitely put me off.
The best thing Strange New Worlds did was a paraphrase of the refit, and they did it well. They bridged the look of the movies, Kirk-era movie ship with this original series very nicely. And we've focused a lot on the 2009, admittedly, but that's, I think, partly because we don't want to rag on things too much. And it's just worth noting that probably the final criticism is the biggest one, and it encapsulates Into Darkness the most, which is unearned grasping for emotion. You have not been with this Kirk and Spock long enough to do what happened in Wrath of Khan. It's just not true. You just can't do it.
All right, well, let's move on to Darkness then. What worked for Darkness, and then we'll get into the negatives.
My ones cover that. I think the villains are poor in all of them. I don't like the ship. I don't have anything specific to say about those ones.
Any good stuff, though?
The casting is good. The pacing is great. There's some good humor. There's some good action scenes. The problem is the story and the villains, and it's just empty. Using Khan, just a bad choice.
No, not necessarily. The way they did it, the attempt to mystery box it again. It's an awful impulse of Abrams. It really is. Just own your story.
Let me give very brief positives about Star Trek Into Darkness for me. One, it is gorgeous to look at. Whether or not I like what I'm seeing is a whole other thing, but it is a beautiful looking film. I did like the development of the Kirk-Spock relationship until we get to what we all hate. I did like the questions surrounding the militarization of Starfleet and the Federation and all of that.
Which was a nice Kelvin shift. Again,
yes.
That was on that.
Well, that involved some ethics. I liked the attack sequence, although I didn't understand how it could actually happen. And I loved Shora Agadushlu in her scenes as the Admiral, but that's about it. I absolutely despised this movie overall. I was so incredibly disappointed when I saw this. It was a pale remake of Khan. I thought it was lazy writing to do that, and I thought the execution of it was not very good either. It lent too heavily on Khan. They did not earn the Khan scream. The ending didn't work. It made death consequence-free. This felt like a Marvel movie with magic serum instead of life and death stakes. And granted, what's our favorite of the movies, right? 2 and 3, where they bring Spock back.
But it's hard. It's hard work.
And it's hard work, and there are ramifications to doing it.
Yeah.
And here we really don't.
Reset button.
Right. I mean, no consequence for death. The one thing I absolutely hated about Into Darkness was the whole underwater sequence. It took up way too much time. It defied all logic, even Star Trek logic.
But that ship is so big. That's bigger than any Enterprise we've had before.
Right, and how are you hiding this thing?
That was also a criticism of the original 2009, that the Enterprise was being built on Earth rather than up in space, which is where it should be.
Good point, Toby. Yes.
At least in Mars Planitia, it wouldn't have been, even if it wasn't.
There's no way that size of ship should be landing anywhere or hiding anywhere on a planet.
Or gets off the ground, because it doesn't. You'd have to. The damage that those impulse engines would do, just getting that thing off the ground.
And how about the environmental angle? It could have killed George and Gracie. Let's also talk about Carol Marcus.
Well, that's just misogyny. You know what I was saying about her? If you had any doubt.
Alice Eve is a wonderful, wonderful actress.
I've
met her. I've interviewed her at one of the Star Trek conventions in London. Lovely human being. I've seen her in tons of other stuff. She was in a movie I adore. The first time I ever interviewed her was for Starter for 10.
Great film. She glows in that film too.
Yeah, and I honestly thought she was going to be a huge star. She was gorgeous and talented and different and brought a different vibe, and I was excited when she was cast. And then, of course, they sent that publicity photo of her in her underwear. This is Dr. Carol Marcus, who B.B. Besh brought to life so beautifully, and tough and smart and opinionated. Total waste. Absolute total waste.
Yeah. In terms of positives, it's hard to think of them. It genuinely is, because I agree with Toby. Any positives I can muster are ported directly over from 2009, and it's undeniably a technical achievement, but that's damning it with faint praise.
2009 is a great setup.
For nothing that followed. Exactly.
And who are the screenwriters?
Orsi and Kurtzman, probably, right?
Yeah. And that's worth pointing out, given what follows in the franchise.
Oh, and Damon Lindelof. I did make a note of that.
From Lost, yeah. But Kurtzman and Orsi, the significant difference between the first two and Beyond isn't just JJ not directing, it's the fact that Kurtzman and Orsi are off it.
Simon Pegg and Doug Young.
Although, I do want to be fair. I mean, Kurtzman has done a lot of good stuff.
The Transformers films?
Well, no. I'm talking about Star Trek specifically, actually.
Okay.
There is some really good Kurtzman Star Trek out there. Let's give credit where credit is due. I know people, poop on him all the time, but Strange New Worlds has a lot going for it. There are some very good episodes of Discovery.
And I'm on the record praising his direction for Starfleet Academy.
Correct. So I just want to make sure that, this isn't the, back in the day it was beat up Berman. These days it's beat up Kurtzman. But I just want to be fair to Kurtzman here.
I think that's fair enough. And all I'm saying is I guess what I'm saying is that I didn't understand that decision when it happened because of Into Darkness. But you're right. It's not. There's a lot of good work that's come out of it. It's just that thing of a lot of the issues which have also come out, you could trace back to this film.
Oh, no question. Look, if you said to me, would you rather watch Into Darkness or Star Trek 5?
Oh, Star Trek 5.
It'd be Star Trek 5.
Yeah.
Because I'm partly because I'm more disappointed in Into Darkness based on 09 than I was in Star Trek 5.
Yeah, agreed. So, Tobes, positives about Beyond?
Again, it goes back to what I've said before. When I did my top list of 5 things I like, I was talking about all 3 films. I wasn't just talking about 2009. I think you can throw in, I think the guest cast for Beyond is very good. They don't make the best use of Idris Elba, who I think is a fantastic actor. I think that is one of the worst villains that's ever appeared in a Star Trek movie. But the thing I like the most is I like the relationship between the crew. And you mentioned it earlier, particularly the Bones spot.
Mm-hmm.
That relates very much back to the original series and the banter that was there.
And the fact that they sit down and have a conversation, how great was that?
Yeah, it's the more intimate character moments that I was talking about before, the things that I want from that. I like the stuff with Scotty, and I like the pairing of Kirk with Chekhov.
It's because they take a breather that the first two films never do. So I understand what you say about the pace, but the price of that is you don't get any real character moments. You just can't.
Again, it feels slightly wasted in that it's better than Into Darkness because they do more with it. There is more character stuff.
It was a relief after Into Darkness, you have to admit that.
I think there is genuine interest in Kirk feeling a bit despondent by the 5-year mission. I think Spock wanting to go and help the Vulcans out and leave Starfleet. I think that is a point of interest. They don't really develop it. They don't do much with it, but I think those are interesting character points. And it is more than just Kirk and Spock. So those are my positives and negatives.
My positives on Beyond. All right, I think this one comes the closest of the three to being Star Trek.
Agreed.
You've got the crew together solving problems. There's a heartbeat in this film that I think even 09, which I really, really, really like, doesn't quite have because they're so busy reestablishing the characters. Here, the characters are established, so we get a little more of them together. You know, there's teamwork, there's logical, no pun intended, explanations for things. I think it has a far more optimistic point of view than the other films. I love the Spock and McCoy sequences. I think we get a teeny bit more of Sulu evolution in here. I'm a little torn on the whole family element with Sulu.
Well, George wasn't a fan of that, was he either?
No, he was not. Why introduce it and not develop it? On the other hand, it doesn't fling it in people's faces.
Execution is good again.
Right.
But the reason...
Correct. But I thought the bit with the original cast photo was beautiful. I thought that was a really touching sequence. What Star Trek is as a family, as a legacy, as a franchise. I really appreciated that. And I want to make sure that we mention in there that Anton Yelchin and Nimoy tributes were very touching.
Was Nimoy supposed to appear in it, in Beyond?
The Peg Young script was so last minute, which is interesting in and of itself that it was better than Into Darkness, that I imagine actually he probably already, even if that had been on the cards, I think that was probably an easy solve because of the time they were rushing it through.
Well, real fast, I want to mention something that has nothing to do with anything. When Into Darkness came out and he was back, that was a big surprise for a lot of people, obviously. That was kept really well under wraps, right? And then, of course, ended up being his last time playing the character. I called him the second he was in it for StarTrek.com, and I said, would you do a quick interview with me about that? He said, absolutely, and he jumped on he said, can you do it this afternoon at 2 o'clock? And I was literally going to my son's Little League baseball game. And so I pulled over the side of the road, and he said, okay, we've got 15 minutes because I've got to get to my kid's ball game. He loved that, and he's like, let's squeeze it in. But I said to him, are you done now? And he was like, of course, one never knows. And then I said, but let me ask you a question. JJ's doing Star Wars now. Would you be willing to be in a Star Wars movie? And, people's heads would explode if you played a character in Star Wars. And he laughed and he said, I wouldn't rule out anything. I'd be open to it. If you look on StarTrek.com, that interview still exists somewhere on there. Nobody ever picked up on it. That I thought that was like going to go on Entertainment Tonight, and that was going to go on Star Wars sites, and that was going to go, absolutely viral. I don't think viral was a word at the time, but I thought for sure people were going to go apeshit over the fact that Nimoy said he'd be willing to be in a Star Wars movie because, Peg crossed over right into the Star Wars stuff, but it never happened. So I'm not sure that they would have ruled him out for Beyond, nor am I sure that they were ever planning to have him in it. I don't know the answer to that question.
So my positives for Beyond were the fact I agree entirely with you, Ian. This is the most Star Trek, and I remember that. I think I said just now was a relief. I felt okay. This feels like Star Trek to me. And interestingly, I think it was the fact it was a more complete story. It wasn't so desperately anchored to the legacy. So it was a little bit, as we said, as nods, and there were nice ones, but it was it wasn't enough. I loved the Yorktown station. I like that as a concept. I love the way it was done. It was a really nice special effect, and it was something I don't think I'd seen really done like that vividly, so I really liked that. I liked Kirk's journey. Again, a bit early to have the
existential crisis.
Yeah, a little. The I'm old. Oh, yeah, okay, but you've only made 2 films and you look the same. But still nicely played. I think the direction was better for a lot of the reasons we've said, and the screenplay is better and does better work with the characters. I love Sophia Boutelis. Yeah, she's really good and best non-regular in all 3 films, and also, interestingly, the best female character.
And an interesting looking alien as well.
Correct.
Yeah, and a new design.
Can we just quickly show some love to Keenser? I thought that was a lot of fun. I thought Deep Roy was really good in his scenes with Simon Pegg.
Yeah.
I love that character. And they gave him more love in one of the comic books, actually.
Also, while we're talking about aliens as well, actually, I really like the head hiding the thing. That was really, really clever and interesting and beautifully done. Combination, I think, of physical and digital, but it was really nice. I didn't like the bike particularly. I didn't like the Beastie Boys, but I'm not a fan of Beastie Boys anyway. Sacrilege. And I quite like the hive thing. It doesn't quite make sense physics-wise, but it was nicely done, and I like that ship.
I'm not a big fan of the Swarm.
I didn't like that either. I thought it felt like a video game.
Yeah. The execution wasn't brilliant, but I like the idea. Although it was a little close to the Borg, or the original version of the Borg being insectoid, maybe.
The Enterprise fights bees.
Well, no, but I quite like that idea. Overall, apart from the Starfleet grudge match thing again, it was less deterministic in that sort of way, which I have a problem with a lot of modern franchises, which is everything has to relate to everything and everybody has to be motivated by everything. And as I've said many times, I like the competent crew being competent in finding new adventures that is not grounded in trauma all the time. And I think that this one does that more. Not completely, but more than the other 2. So, and that's why I like it.
Let me jump into my negatives on the film. Karl didn't work for me. Again, I was annoyed that it was just another pissed off Starfleet guy seeking revenge. I love Idris Elba as an actor, and I was disappointed that he was, for lack of a better word, totally wasted. My biggest issue, oddly enough, was the trailer for Beyond. Set up a different movie. It focused on sabotage. It focused on that motorcycle. And it made you think you were going to see a very different movie.
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, than what you saw.
Well, and they were leaning into the Fast and the Furious, which is Justin Lin's.
Yeah.
That's what he was known for before that.
Yeah, and I just thought, again, here they're appealing to an audience that isn't the audience for the film, and then these scenes are in the film. I think they're all protracted and too long. But I just thought for the Star Trek fans out there, they're like, this song again? And, again, it's a different motorcycle, but we had a motorcycle sequence in the first film. I remember after seeing the movie that the trailer for it bothered me more than it even did at the time.
Yeah, it was a misstep with the marketing. I remember that as well. But I am a massive Beastie Boys fan, so I don't object to that music.
But I didn't need to hear the same song again, and there was absolutely no reason.
I agree with you on that.
Yeah. I think that's probably a fair point, which is to say if they'd used a different band, a different song, maybe it wouldn't have felt so bad. But it was like, surely there's more to that. Or is it, especially because it's not inherently linked to Kirk in the way it was in the original, is it?
No, it was inherently linked to J.J. Abrams, who's a massive Beastie Boys fan.
Fair enough. So overall then, I think I've covered my negatives, so I don't know about you.
No, everything that I've said about the other ones, I think less so for Beyond, but they're still
there.
Sort of, yeah.
Well, because they'd have had to have rebooted, wouldn't they? They'd have had to have changed so much to not have a lot of that. Other than some choices, the bike and things like that, which could have been avoided. I think overall, they made the best out of what they were left with after Into Darkness.
I think after Beyond, I would have been up for another one with this cast.
Me too. I would love to have seen it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. But you know what? As much as I love this cast, I think too much time has gone by.
I agree with you. Yeah. It needed to be done then if it was going to be done.
Yeah. I was hopeful.
Yeah, I think 10 years later, and then you're talking, 12, 13 years if they, ever really started it. I would have liked to have seen a Tarantino one, but yeah,
I don't know about
not going to happen.
So those are our thoughts on the J.J. Abrams Kelvin Universe cycle of films, only 3. We were all agreed we would have actually been up for a 4th, and ironically, we are unlikely to ever get one. And who knows where the movies will go next. Please let us know your thoughts on the Kelvin movies, but also what you think might come next. All the details to contact us, to email us, or talk to us on social media are available in the description. The next couple of weeks, we're taking a little mid-season break while we prepare for the con. When we come back with our first episode, which will be with Larry Nemeczek. Dr. Trek himself is back.
And that'll be dropping the week of the convention.
Indeed. So that's the 4th of August.
Yes, prepare yourselves. It's a good episode.
And other than that, we'll see you next time, Beyond the Final Frontier.
Peace, love, and logic, everybody.
Ta-ra a bit.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Final Frontier, a Star Trek podcast with Rich Matthews, Ian Spanning and Toby Weidman. If you want to get in contact with us, you can email us on beyondffpod@gmail.com or check us out on social media. You can even join our Patreon at BFF Beyond the Final Frontier. Huge thanks go out to Alex Weidman for the brilliant original music. Please search Alex Weidman Composer on YouTube to hear the full fantastic theme and more. Also thanks goes to award-winning voiceover artist Cissy Jones for our excellent opening monologue. Find out more about her incredible work at cissyjones.com. And of course, last but not least, our brilliant artwork